identity meets private sector discipline. Today's conversation is about what happens when identity, discipline, science, capital, and commitment
private
meet.
sector discipline.
We often speak about diaspora and the private sector as being two groups that need to be connected. And our guest journey invites us to ask a more interesting question today. What happens when diaspora and private sector are already connected in a single person, one career, one set of choices, and one commitment to building differently? So we are honored to have our guest, Josh Ghaim, who is joining us for this conversation. So Josh's work sits at the intersection of science, enterprise, investment, platform building, and diaspora engagement. We hope to explore his personal journey and what his experience teaches us about really enabling conditions Africa needs today, from government policy and regulatory harmonization to investment platforms, health manufacturing, distribution, and trusted collaboration across the diaspora community. Usually across the diaspora, the African diaspora, many leaders are asking themselves what I think Josh did many years ago. They're asking themselves how to give back and how to build differently, how to bring networks, capital, expertise, lived experiences, and institutional discipline into partnership with African markets, African communities, and systems in ways that are practical, accountable, and also sustainable. So today we will talk about what needs to change so that diaspora and private sector leadership are treated as part of a system that Africa intentionally enables. So hello, Josh.
Great, thank you for having me.
Thank you for honoring us as the AHCF first fireside chat guest. Thanks.
Great. I think, first of all, I'm really glad to be here. It's just incredible the work that you guys are doing, Pat and the AHCF. It's just another piece of what Africa needs. And I think it's very exciting, and I'm really glad to be here to just continue to spread the word of what we need to do.
Thanks, Josh. So before we get into companies, capital, innovation systems, platform, let's begin with you. I really want to start with identity. We want to know who is Josh Ghaim, and when did you really begin to see diaspora identity, not only as heritage or connection, but as a platform for building?
Yeah, just a little bit of background. I'm originally from Eritrea. I was actually born there. I grew up in some extent in Eritrea. And for those of you who are old enough to remember when the famine in Ethiopia way back, a lot of refugees moved to Sudan. And at that time, my mom was working for the Swiss Red Cross. So we ended up moving to Sudan. That's where they had a lot of the refugee camps that they had set up at the border between Sudan and Eritrea and Ethiopia. So my mom worked for the Swiss Red Cross. My dad was actually the one that was building a lot of the schools for the refugees. So both of them actually worked in Eritrea in a school system for orphanage for kids, where the kids basically where their parents were killed during the war, and for whatever reason they lost both their parents, and they had an orphanage schools that was supported by different organizations. So we lived in Sudan for a while, actually. So I went to high school in Sudan. So that was the start of everything for me about healthcare in Africa, seeing what was happening in the refugee camps, seeing what the Swiss Red Cross and others were doing. That put some background in terms of what's happening in healthcare, some intro basically at that point. It's interesting that when I finished high school in the Sudan, my parents basically said, okay, time to go to college, time to move. So they ended up moving to the US, actually, out of all places. And out of all the places, they ended up moving to Indiana. And for those of you who are not from the US, Indiana is in the middle of nowhere in the US. So it was a big cultural change in terms of, as much as everybody thinks all of America is New York City, it's very different being in the Midwest, although it's very different now. So my whole family lives there. There's a very large Eritrean community there. So it's always, you know how us Africans are. It's like we like to gather, we like to have big parties for whether it's a wedding or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I was always involved in that. But I went to school at Indiana University, did chemistry degree. Then I went to get my PhD at University of Illinois, which is not that far from Indiana. Did my PhD and got recruited out of after my PhD actually to work for Colgate-Palmolive.
Mhm.
It was interesting. That's actually what made me move to New Jersey. But I wanted to continue to work more in healthcare. That was a consumer health type business.
Mhm.
So I ended up moving over to Pfizer. I became the head of their what they call advanced technology group at Pfizer Consumer Health. So did that for a little bit, and then that business was acquired by Johnson and Johnson. So ended up moving to Johnson and Johnson, and where I became actually after a few years became the chief technology officer and head of global R&D. In all throughout this company work, I actually moved to. I was always interesting. The reason I joined Colgate was actually because they were in over 150 different countries around the world. And I wanted to continue to work outside the US. I just loved being in other countries and other places. So, so throughout I worked in China, I worked in France for J&J. So always moved. I worked in Belgium for Colgate. So I always moved around to do different things. But after a while, then I became the chief technology officer at J&J. I was there for 13 years. Got incredible exposure to healthcare. As you could imagine, J&J is one of the largest healthcare companies in the world, and incredible mentors. It's actually people that have been doing research. There's a lot of Africans in that company. So it was interesting. I think, but what triggered all my activities was actually maybe about 10 years ago when I
Mhm.
was at J&J. Our chief science officer, his name is Paul Stoffels. He's one of the most well-known scientists there is in the world. He's actually one of the people that did all the research in HIV. He's one of the first people to discover a lot of the solutions for HIV. And it's interesting that he did all of his research in Congo, in
Oh,
DRC.
wow. Okay.
So he moved there with one of his friends to do all the research in HIV, and he's been involved quite a bit in Ebola and others.
Mhm.
Uh, so I started working with him. I was in the Johnson and Johnson, what they call R&D management committee. He was the head of it. He ran all of R&D, so I happened to represent the consumer health part of it.
Mhm.
And if anybody is familiar, a few years back, pre-COVID, there was a program that was started called the Next Einstein Forum in Africa.
Yes. Mhm.
And so he was supposed to go and he couldn't go. So he's like, I think you should go to this thing because I can't go. So I go there, and it was interesting. Maybe there were about 4,000 people or so in this meeting, and there was a pitch session for startups.
Wow.
And so last minute, basically, they said, hey, why don't you come and help us judge some of the startups? So I participated in judging the startups. Immediately, my reaction was, wow, why can't we do this even more? Why is it just in this one meeting that happens every 2 years? As soon as I got back, spoke to a few people at J&J. So we started the Africa Innovation Challenge.
Mhm.
So if you go online, if you see it, you will see the incredible work. By the way, the first time we did it, we received 500 something, more than
Wow.
500 startup applications.
What year was this? You said 10 years ago.
This was
20.
about almost, yeah, I think it was 2017,
Okay.
2018,
Mhm.
right before, like 2, 3 years before COVID started. And we'd run it 3 times actually after that. It was so successful that, and I was so excited because to give you an example, uh, there was a company in Liberia that we supported, and at some point, which is funny because we introduced it to all the J&J employees, and
Yeah.
then we started working with startups. There were so many people. They're not
Mhm.
most half of them probably were not even Africans, started to volunteer to help.
Mhm.
So it would be like a finance person, a manufacturing person, just people from everywhere in the organization wanted to help.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that company became very successful in Liberia.
Wow.
And which I think a lot of times we forget that yes, money capital is very important, but the
Mhm.
mentorship aspect
Ah,
of how to
yes.
run a company is
Yes.
the most important piece.
Mhm.
I think that's why a lot of Silicon Valley and other companies are very successful because they tend to put around themselves people that have
Mhm.
credibility, people that have relationships, people that could mentor the startups. And I think for me, that's basically what triggered the whole thing is like there's no reason
Yes.
for the African community not to have that kind of a structure.
Yes. Wow.
And it doesn't have to be run by corporations. And it's funny because so I had a few people that were working with me on that. It was very successful. One of the people that was working for me went to a conference in DC
Mhm.
and he met Almaz Nagash, who was the founder of the African Diaspora Network. And
Nice.
I have never met, I'd never heard of the African Diaspora Network. So he's like, you have to meet her. And then he goes, oh, by the way, she's Eritrean.
Hmm.
So that was the end of it. Basically, we got on a call. We got on a call immediately. I joined their board immediately. So I've been doing this for almost 8 years now with the African
Wow.
Diaspora Network, and now I chair the board of the African Diaspora Network. It's a very
Wow.
large community of every field you could think of. It's all Africans and what we call Friends of Africa, people that have interest in doing something in Africa. So that was a big part of how I got started into a lot of it. Healthcare being my background and my
Mhm.
interest, I
Yeah.
think we continue to do more and more in that space. But also, I think it's just it's interesting. I mean, it's just Africa. It's
Yeah.
like there's so
Yes.
much. Even
Wow.
here, I think 54 countries, but it's all connected. Whether we
We're
like
all
it or
connected.
not, I
Yes.
laugh because it's funny. You just walk around at anywhere in New York City or wherever. When you see an African, you always recognize each other. And there's always that intro, that handshake, or just even just nodding your head to say, "I recognize you." I just find it very interesting. But yeah, so I think that led into a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of what we're doing with the
Wow.
African Diaspora Network and what's happening in Africa. And I go to Africa now almost 3, 4 times a year, sometimes, depending on what we're doing, whether it's Gates Foundation or nonprofits or for-profit businesses. So
Hopefully, you tell us more about that. But this is just so fascinating and so inspiring as an immigrant myself, hearing from where you came from and how that has really shaped the way you've been thinking about, Africa. Is really thank you for grounding us in that journey. Now, let's move from that identity, as a personal experience to really an identity as responsibility, credibility, and connection. You talked about the connections that we all have. So it seems a lot of people talk about diaspora and the private sectors as if they are separate actors. And you, from your personal journey and your work, you're showing us that they can be the same actor, Josh. You incarnate that. And so, what does building it from both sides mean to you personally? And you started the story, but I would like to hear a bit more about in the past 10 years, how have you done it? How have you
yeah.
merged the two and have the connections benefit from it?
Yeah, I think the starting point is also as I told my story in 2019, right before COVID happened. I
Mhm.
actually ended up leaving J&J. I should have
Mhm.
mentioned that because I felt that I could do a lot more to almost carry this idea of entrepreneurship supporting startups, being able to bring capital, those kinds of things, and then having this whole huge network of the African diaspora to be able to connect the two. So I started a venture studio.
Okay.
And the venture studio basically has a lot of resources, and then I go raise capital to support startups. And it's very interesting. It was not intentional when I started it. It was started because I wanted to have similar to what we did at J&J, that entrepreneurs should have access to big companies when they need to. And by the way, it was not limited to just the entrepreneurs that are in the continent, but even there's a lot of African entrepreneurs here that tend to do really good when they go back and support a lot of things. So that was the starting point to some extent. When I started that, it helped quite a bit actually. And this idea of building it from within and on both sides, it's just the way I describe it, it's a discipline. Sometimes we forget that a lot of US, European, and other companies are successful. By the way, that applies to nonprofits, that applies because there is a discipline.
Yeah.
It's not a side job that you do, it's like how you fund it, making sure there's metrics and success. I can tell you, I mean, working in big companies, every year you set goals. What are you going to achieve? How much budget do you need? You set all of that, and you have to measure it pretty much every month or every 3 months at minimum, every quarter. You have to say, okay, did we accomplish? What
Yes.
do we need to change? Is it going the way we expected it? And I think for me, that's the kind of things that's needed in every part of Africa. So a lot of times we miss the point that, let's say there's a healthcare crisis. We do a lot of things, and then as soon as we think it's over, you just move away and not think the lessons learned from that to say, how do we prevent it from ever happening again? And I think that's the kinds of things that for me, what that discipline brings. As you
Okay.
do that, then getting organized is also the most important piece, which
Yes.
is how do you leverage? Did you know there are roughly about 15,000 physicians, Nigerian physicians in the US?
Wow.
So
15,000.
15,000. So, by the way, and then if you add up all the scientists, all the people that work in the big companies, you just keep adding that group. It's a significant resource. But everyone is trying to figure out how to do it, how to support. I've never met any African that says, I don't want to do anything with Africa. It just doesn't happen because people have families, people have pride in where they came from. And I think because of that, so it became almost, it needs to be organized. It cannot just be each person or each small group of people doing different things. So for me, I think it's just this discipline
Yes.
of how you operate becomes very important. Make
Yes.
sure that it's okay to have different parallel activities, but everybody should be rowing to the same goal.
Yes. Okay.
So I think for me, those are the kinds of things. By the way, this is like the most generic terminology we use in corporations in the US. Every time there's like a company meeting, the first thing they show you is like 12 people on a little canoe basically rowing in the same direction. Saying, and I think for me, um, there's so many common things between all 54 countries in Africa. And I mean, a good example is healthcare. They
Yeah.
all have very similar need. They all have exact same goals to make sure that every person has access to healthcare. And I think that's a good example where you start organizing everything behind that. So if you make that a goal, then you say, okay, make sure that if anybody they feel bad or they have some symptoms, they should know where to go. It should be easy to go somewhere. It should be easy to go to a pharmacy and get that analysis done. It should be easy if you need to get acetaminophen, if you need to get a medication, you should be able to know where to go and get it. So those are just common goals that we're starting to establish. And often below that, then you need to get not just the private sector, but public health policy people, governments, and everybody also to go the same direction. And I think this is where the diaspora will have a significant voice. I
Nice.
think they have the expertise, they have the capital. And I think it's more just how do we leverage this? And for me, that's basically what we're trying to organize. As you know, last year, African diaspora sent over $100 billion to their families. As much as we can complain about donations and other investments,
Mhm.
the biggest economic power for Africa is the diaspora community.
Mhm.
And by
Mhm.
the way, we have a much broader diaspora definition.
Mhm.
There's more inter-Africa diaspora than there are global diaspora. So if you think
Mhm.
about a lot of Africans move within Africa. So we think there's roughly close to 100 million Africans that live in a different country. It was in Africa.
Mhm.
By the way, remittances are not just coming from US, Europe, and others. Over 20 billion comes from within Africa. So
Mhm.
imagine people are generating a lot of income. People, there are successful people in Africa, and they're still sending their families some money, even within the continent.
Mhm.
So I think there's just significant opportunities here. We're trying to get everybody in the same boat, in the same rowing the same direction. Again, there
Yes.
are goals that some countries might need slightly something different, but the main goals doesn't change because it's access to healthcare. Just make sure
Yes.
that everybody is healthy and make sure that there are no more major pandemics and those kinds of things and being prepared for that.
Uh, Thanks, Josh. You're right. The majority of diaspora want to reach back and help. There's some passion there to build. And yet, there are two things. There's the diaspora passion, but there is also the business discipline. At some point, is beyond remittances, is
Yeah.
investment, right? So I'd like to hear from you. Where do you think that diaspora passion and business discipline reinforce each other? And where do they create tension? And in your
Yeah.
own journey, do you have any examples of that tension?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the from a diaspora community perspective, like I said before, everybody wants to do something. They're not sure what to do. And that tension, I think, comes from who do I trust?
Mm-hmm.
How do I, obviously, a lot of people have, it depends. I don't want to say all countries, but sometimes you don't trust the government. Sometimes you don't trust even your own family members because
Mm-hmm.
if you gave them money, what's going to happen? I can tell you the number one complaint we get even on remittances is that people saying, I sent money to my family because they needed healthcare help, but they went and spent the money somewhere else. Now I have to support them because there's an emergency. That kind
Mm-hmm.
of so having some kind of a structure, having some kind of a trust, even at the family level, but more importantly,
Mm-hmm.
uh, governments are supposed to be the conduit of making this simple for the
Mm-hmm.
diaspora to bring more money into the countries. I could give you an example. Last year, the Prime Minister of Cabo Verde showed up. We had the African Diaspora Investment Symposium in Washington, D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow he found out about it the day that we were opening. And we got a call saying, by the way, is it okay if he comes in the next hour and a half or so and stop by?
Mm-hmm.
We said, yeah, absolutely. And he came in and opened the meeting. And he
Yes.
made the comment that his commitment to the diaspora community because 25% of their GDP comes, this is a tiny country, a tiny island. And he said the reason is that his economic development continues to be driven by his diaspora community. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
good example. I think if people read the article this week about Rwanda from, there was actually even a LinkedIn topic from Gates himself, Bill Gates, talking about Rwanda, saying how optimistic he is about what's happening in Rwanda. I think when you look at some of those countries that are doing incredible things, I think there's significant
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. But I agree that the diaspora needs a system that
Yeah.
allows it. Yeah, sending money to family, I think that will continue to happen. By the way, there's a bigger issue we're trying to solve there also. When
Mm-hmm.
Africans sent over $100 billion to Africa,
Yes.
they're paying, in some countries, they're paying 10 to 12%
Okay.
in bank fees.
Yes.
And we think that's just complete robbery.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, for those of us that live in the US, you do any kind of transaction, you might pay maximum 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen countries like Mexico and others that are doing the same thing with diaspora. to paying 3% or less. By the way, that's also in the UN Development Plan. That's actually one of their goals is that to keep it below 3%. But Africans are paying almost 4 times that in some cases.
Mhm.
So we're looking at that to say, wow, that's almost close to $10 billion of money that should be going into Africa is actually going into fees. So
Yes.
we're talking to the African uh, Development Bank, to a lot of other organizations, to countries to say, you need a better system, and the African Bank should be responsible and making it very easy.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I think Nigeria recently did something for their diaspora. In
Yes.
the past, if you have a bank account, you almost have to do verification in person. You have to fly all the way there. So they've eliminated that, which is you send your passport, you get them all the information so you could do it online. So I think the more one, the diaspora community needs to be much more proactive to highlight where the bottlenecks are and where the pressure points are. And then the government's responding to simplify it because the more that happens, the easier for everyone it will be. And I think more money will flow. Keeping in mind that the African diaspora is extremely successful here in most countries. So
Mhm.
so there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of capacity to support Africa.
Nice. Well, thank you. There's so much you've said there that need to be unpacked. I would say, you mentioned trust, and it's also on the other side in terms of, we have seen where there's a double bind that many diaspora builders face. They're not always trusted as fully local by African institutions. It's amazing what Nigeria is doing for its diaspora,
Yeah.
removing those barriers and including in trusting their diaspora members. And they may not always have been taken seriously as well, I mean, the diaspora, as fully commercial by international investors. So there is something to be said there, and I also would like to hear from you how you've seen that double bind in your own work or in the entrepreneurs that you support. Not fully trusted as local African, but then not taken maybe too seriously as fully commercial
Yeah.
by national investors.
Yeah, it's a very interesting because for me being in the US and supporting a lot of startups, by the way, this is a true problem, not just for Africans, but it's also a true problem even for African Americans here.
Hmm.
Less than 2% of all the investments actually go to African American led startups here in the US. So the venture capital money never goes to the Black community here in the US. So I think for Africa itself, people like myself have to do more to just continue to build that credibility.
Okay.
Um, I, and I'm going to give you a few examples. It's interesting what we're doing to help startups in the continent get credibility because if a company that, let's say a startup, I'm going to use in Kenya, Maidawa, it's a pharmacy chain. If they wanted to go, needed investment and they go to investors in the US, even diaspora people, they're not going to give them money because they don't know them. There's just no connection, no network. And then it's like, wait, if I gave them money, what happens to my money? How do I get it back? What happens? Oh, there's all these questions that
Mhm.
happens. And by the way, majority of investments that happen here in the US is also through networks. Somebody
Mhm.
knows somebody and they connect you so that they're putting their word basically saying, I trust this person.
Mhm.
And then other investors that trust them are more likely to invest. So we felt that that whole system is going to need some help.
Mhm.
So including myself at the Ignite, it's interesting. I love this story because there's in the healthcare in the health beauty space, there's a store called the Detox Market here in the U.S. And Roma, who started, he's a French guy that started the stores here for beauty. He
Mhm.
called me one day and he said, I just met this woman. She's from Chad. She has an incredible story. Came from Chad, went to Harvard Law School. She lives in Germany now, and she started this business in hair care. And I think you should meet her. If you're willing to support her, I'll put her products in my store. So do you see, like, she went to him asking if she has a great idea and everything. He said, you know what? If you're willing to support her, I'm willing to support her. So her name is Sawa. She lives in Germany. She's here in the US a lot. And the reason I bring this up is if you're in the US or in Europe, you should buy her products because it's actually called Cheribe, Cheribe. You know, what she did was women in Chad have very long, very thick hair, and they use an ingredient. There's a local ingredient that's used in Chad. So she created a women's co-op, a farm basically, that's owned by women. And she gets the ingredient from Chad into France and then gets converted into all kinds of hair care products. So when she came to us, we're like, okay, we will fund you. We'll provide you the capital that you need, at least till you grow, because then we'll bring other investors. But this helps you build the trust that you need to show people that this is actually a great idea. Guess what? She is in over 500 Target stores in the US now. Uh, she's moving into 1,500 Sally Beauty stores. She's going to go into potentially Walmart and other places in the near future. And for me, it's more like, okay, one person met her and they introduced her to the next person they know, and we gave her money, and then more investors come. There's a cycle that happens, and we're trying to almost to institutionalize and democratize that approach. It doesn't have to be me doing this. There should be a million of us doing it every day. So this is why I think the work we're doing was what's called investing in innovation. Investing in innovation is in collaboration with a group called Salient Advisory in Canada. It's a consulting firm, and it's very simple. The idea here is that African startups, especially in healthcare, especially in the last mile delivery. So last year we started this whole idea of pharmacies. And when I say pharmacy, it's much broader than just selling drugs or making drugs access. But as you know, in Africa, pharmacy is the first point of care for people. That's where they get their first access. So we looked at it to say, let's go find the best performing pharmacy chains in Africa. I think we saw 90 something companies came forward. We ended up selecting 10. We can't do all 90 of them, but we said, let's start with 10 companies. So to give you an example, Mydawa, Pharma, Meditech, Dawa McNoni, Shifa in Egypt, Sproxil, Zuri Health, all of them are part of our network. And the way the model works is basically there are a lot of experts like myself and a lot of other people that Salient has put together. So there's advisory committee that has been put together. And the idea is basically, let's make sure these companies are ready for future investments. And when they come work with this investing in innovation, depending on where they are, if they're early, they can get like 50,000 or things like that upfront. That's a grant. But they can also get up to $225,000 if they're in a growth mode to prove certain things to be ready for investment.
Yes.
So this is the second cohort, and we keep them for 3 years, basically. They get mentorship. So what we did with this group of pharmacies is basically, one, they got the grants that we said we would, but we brought all of them in Nairobi. As part of this investing innovation, we brought in investors, but the most fun part was we brought 7 pharma companies to Nairobi. And the idea is basically they can negotiate different activities. If a pharma company is trying to bring a product to Ghana, they can negotiate with one of those versus this company. If they call any of the big pharma companies, nobody will talk to them because they don't know them. So, but in this case, we created a safe environment that allows these companies that we prepared. By the way, when there is the negotiations happening, the deal, what we call deal sessions, myself and a few of us sit in different rooms basically when they're negotiating to help them what they should think about things, how to think about the partnerships. And it's very interesting. The Salient Advisory with the Investing Innovation so far have probably given away about in grants about $4 million. But the companies that were supported have raised over 50 million. So you could see in terms of how this would work. I think they've signed about 17 million in contracts. So almost like that 4 million is now getting scaled almost like 15 times. It's that kind of just you keep increasing it every time
Nice.
because you're bringing other systems, and those systems trust it because it came prepared with people that have expertise. And that's the
Sure.
model we're starting to build with investing in innovation. But I think to your question also, it's very important. How do people that are in the diaspora might be seen as, well, they're not truly African because they live somewhere else? I
Yeah.
could tell you, within our African diaspora community, we're starting to see more and more people going back. I'll give you three examples. Um, BioSawa is a company in Rwanda that's getting ready to produce antibodies, basically biologics for women's cancer. Imagine the first biologics are going to be produced in Rwanda this year at a very low cost. And this was because the CEO, Menges, he's actually originally from Eritrea. He spent 30 years at Genentech and all the big pharma companies. And he decided to retire from that, very successful, and started BioSawa to do this. So, I mean, they've had incredible success. They're building the final manufacturing is ready to go. It's just very exciting. By the way, the first thing he told me was when he started his company, 90% of his investment came from the diaspora community.
90%.
90% of their funding came from the diaspora community. And that's all because of the relationships he has with the diaspora community. And I think that's a way. By the way, Yamachi is another company that's doing genomics in Ghana. Yao, who's also another US, used to be US based. But in Ghana, there's actually something very cool going on. University of Ghana now, Yao is actually a visiting professor there. So even though he started his company, Yamachi, in Ghana, and he's doing a lot of genomics tests for pharma companies, he's also now listed as a visiting professor, so he teaches there because University of Ghana has a very aggressive program to graduate more PhDs, more scientists in their program. But having people go back and for starting a company, but then being to get involved a few days a week to be able to teach students, to mentor students. Same thing. Revna Biosciences is in Ghana. That's doing all kinds of really interesting tests. Revna is actually interesting. Derek, who's the founder, I hired him into J&J a while back, introduced him to people, met him at J&J. And after a while, he came to me and said, I want to start a company in Ghana. And I give him a lot of credit because he was going back and forth for a long time. And now he spends a lot of time in Ghana, but he has a company called Revna Biosciences in Ghana that's doing the same thing. So I think the diaspora community is very loyal to Africa. And yes, there's some tensions that might happen, but they're starting to prove that they're not there for just to check off or only to visit families, but they're willing to go back when needed to make sure that there's businesses being built in Africa. And I personally think, and this is a commitment we're making as an African Diaspora Network, is that we are going to create the biotech center in Africa. We are going to create the R&D network. We're going to create the scientific collaboration, the clinical research that's needed, the manufacturing aspect. But also we have to spend time like what we're doing on the investing in innovation on the last mile delivery, whether it's the care part of it and the medicine part of it.
Yeah. So, Josh, I mean, you've given such incredible examples of what the diaspora entrepreneurs, how they're moving from ideas to scalable solutions, and you've talked about some enabling conditions. You've talked about capital, you've talked about mentorship, you talked about trusted local partnership, but what else is needed? I've not heard much coming from the government sides.
Yeah.
What could be some of the enabling conditions from the government side? I've heard Ghana, I've heard Rwanda, I've heard
Yeah.
Nigeria. How can this be amplified to other nations and just for them to bring the enable conditions to build a next generation to
Yes.
come back and
Yeah,
invest?
I think it's very important. there's no question. It's extremely difficult to go negotiate with 54 countries and 54 health ministers, and it's just everything is not that easy, as you can imagine. But I think we're starting to see good progress.
Mhm.
So, and for me, we've been focused on looking at what is the thread that would connect some of those countries.
Yeah.
And I think what we're starting to see is what Africa CDC is doing is a good example. What
Mhm.
the African Medicines Agency is doing.
Yeah.
And this is mainly around healthcare. By the way, there are other sectors, especially like in the tech sector in Africa, it's becoming extremely developed. Investment is flowing quite a bit in Africa in the tech space. So those are easy and they should continue.
Mhm.
We expect there's more billion-dollar companies, more companies showing up in Africa than we've ever seen before, and more investment is going there. But in healthcare, we think that having organizations like Africa CDC, the African Medicines Agency, by the way, I think you and I, we've been talking about Africa CDC. I think that's
Yes.
very important. The African Medicines Agency, the recent signing they did, they've always had collaborations with EU and the European Medicines Agency, but
Mhm.
it's a big deal that last month they signed an agreement with the FDA to share data.
Wow.
So keep that in mind. Imagine, why is it that if there is a cancer drug that could be useful in Africa and it has
Mhm.
been used here in the US for the last 10 years, 20 years and got approval, why does
Yes.
it need to go through a complete approval and a whole long process? It should be
Mhm.
simpler. Uh, but I think we're starting to see also research being done in the continent. Out of all places, actually in Zimbabwe, I just met a person that is doing quite a bit of work to understand how effective are drugs that were developed for Western, mostly for Caucasian population, how effective
Mhm.
are they in the African population?
Mhm.
And this is being done out of Zimbabwe. And I think those kinds of things are going to be very important, but our starting point has to be the way I look at it is you got Africa CDC, you got Africa Union, you got the Medicines Agency. Let's do more work on that so that they could recommend to the member countries what could happen. Second is there's almost what I call the coalition of the willing. Those
Mhm.
countries that I've been mentioning, whether there's a lot of countries, their health ministers are very progressive. They want to do more things. And I think we need to include those because we're very good at it in Africa. When we see somebody doing something that makes sense, we don't mind copying it. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. By the way, we've seen this in Rwanda quite a bit. They're very aggressive on how they move in a lot of things. And a lot of other countries are adapting similar things. So I think we're going to see that. And I love the fact that I think, Rwanda now is probably, it competes almost with Singapore. It's the
Hmm.
easiest place to start a company.
Nice.
You can have a company set up within 24 hours in Rwanda. So you can't even do that here in the US when it comes to how quickly they move and how quickly they've simplified their system for
Yes.
companies to be established in Rwanda. And I think that kind of best practices become very important. And I think
Mhm.
that's going to be critical for everything that we do. But we need to start moving, like I said earlier, in the same direction and leverage this big institutions that have been doing small things in the past. I think they're starting to recognize that there's big opportunity and there's more people will follow if they do it right.
Sure. Wow. Wonderful. And so we've covered several practical models and those enabling conditions, good examples. Um, and you've been very extensive, Josh. And at the African Health Catalyst Forum, we always want to bring in the audience. And we have about 15 minutes left. And as much as we want to go on and hear the wonderful things you are sharing, it's time for us to turn to our audience. So I'm bringing in the audience now. And I mean, they've started sharing questions here. And so please use the Q&A box as much as you can. And we go from there. So there's one question I'm bringing now from someone, and the question is for African Health Consortium who want to partner with private equity or venture capital today. What specific metrics and governance structures do they need to have in place? You talked about the matrix, right? So, and in other words, I think they want to know what will make African institutions better partners to diaspora innovators as well.
Yeah, I think the starting point, it's a very good question because that's the kinds of things that are very important. So structure is very important to make sure that companies or startups upfront are very disciplined. From that, what I mean is, for example, you have very specific idea, you have proven it that there is a big market for it, and those are things that you could do on your own in terms of just proving that this is actually a relevant idea. Once you do that, the most important piece is actually to put some structure behind it. And I always recommend people that find advisors that would work with you. By the way, a lot of times you can go into LinkedIn. I get so many of those. You can go into LinkedIn and look for people of African descent, the diaspora, regardless of where they live, that are in the same field of what you're doing, and ask them to advise you in a few topics. I think those kinds of having, it's very interesting in the US. There's this thing that we talk about, name means a lot, name of someone that, so you'll see a lot of companies when they start, especially when they're getting ready to raise money, they will put on their advisory list some big names. They would put people that have expertise. Those are the core, the people that do the work. But then you have people that just have big recognition that everybody would go, wow, if that person is involved, I should be involved in that. And I think there's an opportunity to make sure that you have structure. And it's for two reasons. One is other people will trust you if you're relying on some of the people that they know, they could see their background and things like that. The second advantage is it's extremely useful for your startup to get advice from people that have done it before. So I think it's important. In the case of what we're doing with the investing innovation, we're basically putting a system to do that. So when the investing innovation brings investors, they're already convinced that this is the right company because they've already been vetted. By the way, we're doing the same thing now at the African Diaspora Network. We're starting to push. We have two different programs that we run. One is called Builders of Africa. Those are entrepreneurs in Africa. They join our program. They get mentorship. They get all kinds of support, how to set up their company, training, and everything else. We do the same thing here in the US also. It's called ABLE, Accelerating Business Leadership, mostly also African Americans and Africans. So I think what I would say is just work around your structure. Once you've proven the business, the first thing you should do is bring the right advisors to help you. A lot of times it's even questions you don't want to know. You don't want to know the answer to because you go, well, is this the right business? So those people have to be willing to say, this doesn't make any sense, but you should be thinking about this area.
Yes.
So you want people that are going to give you truth about, by the way, once you pass them, they will bring other people with them. They will bring a network. You would be surprised. I mean, it's interesting. Just go on LinkedIn and find an African and see how many people are connected to them. So I just looked at mine. Actually, I think I have 9,800 or something like that on LinkedIn. So it's easy for me to post something to say, hey, if you have expertise in this, there's somebody that needs help. So most people are willing to do it.
Yes.
So just work on proving your concept is right. And then once you do that, by the way, it doesn't mean you stop what you're doing if it doesn't look, it's just you have to repivot where you go. Because that's how businesses are built. It's not the first idea, but there's the second, the third, the fourth that actually get to reach the market in the end. The main concept might still be the same.
Thanks, Josh. One question from the audience member. This person is from Gambia, and they're telling us about how the national HIV program depends entirely on the Global Fund for ARVs and for the operations that keep the program running. And that's not unique to the Gambia, as we all know.
Yes.
If Global Fund priorities shifted tomorrow, programs across the continent are at risk. What role can diasporal capital or private sector investment realistically play in reducing that kind of structural dependency in essential medicines? And why hasn't it happened yet? That's a question from the member.
Yeah, I'll start from the back, which is why it has not happened yet, because people have been relying on almost the nonprofits, the donations, and everything else. Everybody assumes like that's going to be there for the rest of our lives, basically. I think that's just not a good assumption, and we saw that that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think there is an opportunity, especially with the diaspora community, and this is part of the reason why we're speaking with the Africa Development Bank and others to create mechanisms for investment. Like I said earlier, there's about $10 billion of African money that goes to banks because I'm not saying it has to be zero, but it should be about $3 billion, not 10. That should be going to the banks. The rest of it should be invested into healthcare. So I think there's an opportunity, but it needs structure.
Yes.
So this is how you get the private sector. By the way, that should lead into, it might not be companies to develop the next HIV drug, but the last mile distribution. How do people get access? And we've had very successful programs. I think it's interesting. I was involved what's it called? Mothers for Baby in prevention of HIV in South Africa. And it was very interesting because companies like J&J were a big part of it, which is a text message based just communication that when women get pregnant, to make sure that the HIV doesn't get transferred to the baby. Putting some training, some programs, what they could do. It's very interesting because it was so successful that the government of South Africa said, okay, we know exactly what to do now. We'll take care of it. And all the external companies actually left. They were no longer involved. So I think there's a partnership, especially in HIV, that's needed between governments and the private sector. But there should be also economic reasons to do it by creating last mile delivery, last mile communication. Those are the businesses that could be created in Africa, not necessarily where the drugs are, because there's enough drug access that could come into Africa. It's just it has to be funded differently than some of the agencies that have put like Global Fund and others. Some of them will remain for a little while, but I would not assume in the next 20 years from now that I think Africa is going to need to be extremely independent, and it needs to be done at the country level, and in some cases at the African Union level. But there's this collaboration that's needed, putting the right programs, access to medicine. By the way, some of the things we're talking about is some of those drugs have become generics. They're very low cost, but they're not produced in Africa. And a lot of times what we see is that, yes, when Global Fund, Gates, and others are getting them, they might be negotiating better prices, but a lot of African countries have not negotiated very strong prices because I could tell you there was recently just basic drugs, trying to get them into Africa, where it might be manufactured by an Indian company, and then there's a European broker that buys it from the Indian company, and then there's a distributor in Africa. So you almost pay 20-30% margin to each one of them. So by the time it reaches a consumer or a patient in Africa, they just paid double what it actually cost, what it should cost in Africa. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of discussions. One, we should be manufacturing certain drugs if there is a volume that's needed. And it doesn't have to be the governments manufacturing it, but the same companies that are producing it, can they produce it in Africa the same way that we're talking about the cancer drugs being produced in Rwanda?
Thank you. So I'm just coming back to what you mentioned as a mechanism that we put in place for alternative sources of funding for our health systems in Africa. The African Health Catalyst Forum actually started because of that. And over the past year, we've had roundtable discussions, and we've moved beyond the discussions and working with the Africa CDC Health Economics and Finance Division, Nadia's group. We, together with others, have put an expert working group to look into this exact question as to what mechanism and how we tap into the diaspora and the private sector to get a mechanism going, so we have some sustainable ways to strengthen healthcare systems in Africa and go to the last mile to deliver a reliable healthcare system. So we are almost at the end here, but before we leave, Josh, I have one more question for you. And the question is, what must change so that the next Josh Ghaim is part of a system that Africa intentionally enables? What can institutions, government funders, continental bodies, entities such as African Health Catalyst Forum produce as concrete commitment this year, or do differently to enable the next generation of diaspora entrepreneurs to build Africa health system that this continent deserves?
Yeah, I think the starting place is going to end up being creating the systems that are needed to make sure all the activities are coming together. It's very interesting because at the African Diaspora Network, we've said it's okay to have the Nigerian diaspora, the Ethiopian diaspora community set up, but they should have the same goal as the African diaspora community. And they could have their own programs that they do with their community. But for us, it's very important. By the way, that applies to healthcare, that applies to a lot of areas, but it's more common goals and systems that need to be built. So I'm very happy to say that actually in a couple of weeks, we're launching the first African diaspora and scientists in the continent collaboration hub.
Nice.
So, and the idea here is that will move from that to investors, to collaboration of startups. So we think we're going to continue to build this, but having a system that allows an African entrepreneurs to go into a system and say, wow, I need an expert that has regulatory background. They go into the system and they just find one and they reach out to them to say, hey, can you help me advise this? That kind of just putting some systems. But we got to start holding all the different agencies also that we talked about earlier. I don't want to say governments yet. I think there are some governments that will do it, but the agencies themselves have to be part of the system. Because if you get the diaspora community, the African entrepreneurs, and then the agencies in the same path, it becomes much easier because governments can't say no. And a good example is, I love the fact that the Africa CDC report they did on R&D, for example. If African countries spent 1% of R&D across all their activities, solar, whatever they need to do, but only 0.15% of it if it went to healthcare, 0.15% of that 1%. So 15% of the 1%. So it's 0.15% of their GDP went into R&D for health, into healthcare investment. The return is 137x. So for every dollar spent, you get $137. It creates almost 5 million jobs over the next few years. It creates incredible number of jobs. It creates almost $700 billion in GDP, economic growth that's created. And I think we need to make those happen. I think it's important that that's how you create economic growth, is that you grow the economy, everything follows. And by the way, I think it's very important when we think about, I personally think that everything should start from the last mile, which is not, I can get stuff into Nairobi, I can get stuff into any big cities, but it's the patient that's in the most remote area, can they get the same access? If we solve that, then it's much easier to work backward from there. And I think that's going to be very important. I think we just have to start bringing people together. But at the African Diaspora Network, we're creating the systems. Once the systems are created, then it's much easier to just follow. It's almost like the 5 steps you need to take. It becomes much easier for everybody to follow the same formula. Again, it doesn't mean countries don't have to tweak it. It just means that you have a very clear path of the 5 steps you need to take to be successful.
Thank you, Josh. We are at the end of our conversation here. And I have to say, there are 3 main things that I'm taking away. And there are so many other things. But the first one is that diaspora leadership can be operational. It can be commercial, scientific, and deeply practical. And second is that the private sector discipline matters because good intentions are not enough to build solutions at last. We need to put in place those metric system, what works, what is not working, and gauge progress meaningfully. And third, that the next generation of diaspora health entrepreneurs, they certainly need encouragement, and yet they need also trusted pathways, serious partners, and patient capital, institutions willing to open doors without lowering standards. So this conversation, I think, gives us clear challenge for the rest of the forum. How do we move from celebrating Africa or diaspora potential to building systems that allow that potential to translate into health innovation, entrepreneurship, public value for the continent? So please join us to follow up on this conversation with the African Health Catalyst Forum roundtable discussions that are coming up in the next weeks. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Josh.
Thank you.
And, for an informative conversation, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thanks.
Great.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Mhm.